Hello, it's Brad Laurie, or BlockchainBrad, and today I'm honoured to speak with Aleksandar Kuzmanovic. He is one of the key members of BloXroute. He is certainly well versed when it comes to their core technology. Aleksandar, thank you very much for making time to speak with me today.
Hey, Brad, thanks so much for inviting me. It's an honor for me.
Likewise, mate, and thank you very much for making the time. I have a lot of time for BloXroute, and for those who are wondering, this is entirely free. This is about education. It's about trying to provide more key information from the source so that you can have key information provided to you as early as possible as BloXroute continue to innovate. So Aleksandar, thank you once again for your time. You are the co-founder and chief architect of BloXroute, and you have a significant background when it comes to technology. You also have credentials all the way back to your northwestern roots. So give us a bit of a background check, you know, from the man himself on why you are fit to lead as the chief architect and what your core role is given your credentials.
So basically, I'm when I'm not at BloXroute, I'm a professor at Northwestern University, professor of computer science. Mm-hmm. And basically, my expertise lies in computer networks. And so for the last over 10 years, I worked on problems of congestion control, on content distribution networks, on network neutrality, measurements, and all these other internet-related topics. And so when my former PhD student and now our CEO, Uri Klarman, actually, when we saw this blockchain scalability problem, we said, hey, this is a fundamentally a computer networking problem, right? Why is that the case? Because blockchains are these large-scale distributed systems, networks that consist of many nodes that sit on different parts of the world, and basically making them communicate more efficiently would definitely move up the scale much more significantly than where they're currently. And the big deal is that we can actually significantly improve the scalability properties of blockchains. And this is how it all started. We said like, let's try to help this community, and that's how BloXroute basically was. I
see. Now, your engineering background, the fact that you're a professor, it also holds significant weight when it comes to credibility and the ability to build out sound technology. Now, let's move it back to the discussion of layer zero, which is what you're alluding to essentially with the underpinnings of blockchain, making them more integrated, creating a network, as you mentioned. How important is it to establish something like the BDN, for example, to be a layer zero? What does it actually mean?
Yes, so basically a BDN is a term that we actually pioneered. It stands for a blockchain distribution network, which is a network infrastructure for blockchains, right? And so if I would have to give an analogy from other disciplines, for example, what Akamai is, which is a large content distribution network that helps us all experience much better streaming services and to download a web faster. This is what we are building and have pretty much built for some of the blockchains for the blockchain community. And one important thing that I would like to stress out here is that this is not just about networking. People often tell me like, so this is a network infrastructure, so it's a faster network. Yes, it is a faster network, but I would also like to say it's a smarter network, right? Yeah. What it means is that we are doing a lot of hard work in the background, basically doing a lot of propagating transactions, caching them, making sure everything is in sync, and really, really helping out blockchains such that when a block comes, it's really a slam dunk. That means it can swiftly propagate. And so by making sure that this communication between all these different blockchain networks, which can be really big networks, is actually happening very swiftly.
Right. Now, let's talk about that in the context of the emerging marketplace, the emerging sort of business frame as well, and the emerging value of blockchain. Now, if you're essentially bringing these together, how does that liken to historical references, say, for example, to the internet? You know, if you're emerging as essentially a new internet of value in terms of connecting and interconnecting blockchains, are you really trying to take hold of a key market share? You know, being a layer zero that perhaps many blockchains and many startups haven't really tried to attempt in the recent past because of its challenges. because of the complexities and because of the technological sort of knowledge that you need to be able to do it.
I think that to an extent is basically what we are doing. But what I would like to say is that the blockchain community is mostly consists of cryptographers and people working on like trying to understand how to prove some security properties and stuff like that. We are really networking people. Others have realized that there is a benefit in building an infrastructure and a system that would help connect all the different players in the blockchain community. For example, we talked to many different mining pools. And so basically they were the first to realize, aha, it would be great for us if we can do something along these lines. However, they not only didn't have sufficient expertise because they really are in a completely different business. On top of that, it's hard for any single entity to build a really global network. Like if you're a mining pool in China, you're hardly going to be able to improve network performance in Finland, where another data center or another fellow miner may be sitting, right?
Right.
And so really, it's, I do believe that it really is necessary to have a single entity, and not necessarily us, but somebody to take care of all these problems, because I think this on its own is quite a challenging task. And having a separate a blockchain community or a mining community or somebody else to do this, I think would be too much beyond because they have many other problems to solve. And so we believe that there is a case for us to help and to provide this service to all other players in the blockchain space.
I see. Now, what about the potential of bringing in the mainstream sector as well, Aleks, in terms of enabling them to benefit from the interconnections and the network of blockchains that your technology really creates, and broadens?
Yeah. So basically, I think there are two aspects of this. The first aspect is just bringing scalability to the face of it, right? Mm-hmm. Because I mean, I'm going to many conferences, and we are all reading news and everything else, and we are hearing about different new blockchains and different advances. But I'm sorry, the reality is that the TPS rate is not where we really want it to be, right? Right. Because, I mean, Ethereum is doing 9, Bitcoin Core is doing 3, and then like Bitcoin Cash can do 30, but is actually doing much less. And so basically, the first thing to bring here is to say like, hey, we can support any consensus protocol, and we can help them scale in this and move them in this range of thousands of transactions per second, right? And right. So this is the first important message to the mainstream businesses and community, which is sending the message like, hey, it looks like these guys know what they're doing and they can scale it up, because if it doesn't scale, it really is hard to come up with some compelling application. I'm not saying that there aren't, there are different philosophies on what blockchains are good for and should be used for. I belong to this, I believe that blockchains to be useful, they need to be scalable and need to be used by users at a large scale. And so this is something that we are bringing. On the second note, it is also essential for us to be capable of providing some guarantees to large exchanges, to the mining pools, to everybody involved, to distributed applications, anybody involved in this space, that tomorrow when they engineer their systems so that they do send a lot of transactions, that these will be, there is some system there that will be able to kind of pick it all up and make it all work, because this is really, really important for the entire space.
I would tend to agree. And Aleksandar, just to help us understand, to use an analogy, is it fair to say that you act like a plug-in for blockchains in terms of a plug-in for scalability? And I don't say that lightly, because as you mentioned before, scalability solutions are bolted on or built upon other layers above the layer 0. And to date, as you mentioned, there isn't a lot of empirical proof of substantial TPS in practice and in operation through applications. So in that respect, if that is correct, is it fair also to say that many blockchains are coming to you saying, how can we plug in?
That is absolutely the case. And I think the analogy of plugin, it's not an analogy, that's really how it works. The way it works is basically we build this gateway software which coexists with blockchain nodes. It can either sit on that particular same machine, or it can be a very nearby machine depending on a particular blockchain system. And it is basically plug and play. Why is that the case? Because we don't change a single line of code in a blockchain system. This is by design, and this is what we really want to do, because changing something on a blockchain system is not as simple, because there are often communities, and then there are people who don't want to do it, and so on. So for us to be efficient in this domain, we really provide a plug and play kind of approach. And so, yes, you're right. I mean, we're talking to many different blockchain projects. Necessarily, some projects such as Bitcoin Cash and Ethereum, we worked from day one knowing that these are leaders in the space, and hence we wanted to support them. At the same time, we had an outreach and we talked to these fresh, new, different blockchain systems. And so there, it was easy for us to explain that we bring scale and that we bring value. And it was fairly easy for us to find a common language, because we are helping them, they are helping us. And so it's a common goal to make this.
It's certainly reciprocally beneficial, but I would suggest it's also beneficial to the broader blockchain and crypto space, because everything rests with the ability to be scalable for businesses and for applications to have any semblance of value. They need to be expedient, they need to be, productive, and they need to be efficient. And that's what scalability really enfranchises, is that ability to make it, to reduce the lag time, most importantly, and increase throughput, reduce latency. Now, so far you mentioned Bitcoin Cash and Ethereum, and yet we still see significant, lag times even with them. As you mentioned, the throughput isn't so substantial yet. So how far along are you in not just enabling the plugin, but actually facilitating via proof of these blockchains that are now working with BloXroute?
Say it again. How are we?
So in terms of actually starting to actualize and empirically show how BloXroute can evidence increased productivity of these blockchains.
Yes. So basically, one principle that we are following at BloXroute is that we are in the mode of, hey, show, don't tell, right? Because talk, it's necessary to talk, it's necessary to bring up ideas, but really there should be some level of delivering, right? Because if I keep saying what I'm saying for a year and nothing is happening, then you're gonna doubt, like, and say, hey, these guys are
exactly,
just talking and not doing. So we did a lot of work in the last year. In particular, we had a big test involving more than 300 nodes on 3 continents, showing empirically that Bitcoin Cash can scale to more than 1,000 transactions per second, which was a huge milestone, because not because we didn't think it would happen, but because there are many challenges in making all these things work. Networks are very complicated systems, and problems can often just push you back, but we were capable of showing that. On top of that, we were capable of, we are working with the leading miners in Ethereum and in Bitcoin Cash, and we had 2 additional tests, one with Bitcoin Cash, where we have shown that on their testnet, we chose to do that because there we were capable of generating these huge blocks for no fee, because basically it's a testnet, and they were capable of showing that we are really bringing a value to that space.
I see.
And finally, we had another successful test with Ethereum miners. We are collaborating with more than 70% of the Ethereum hash power. And basically what we were capable of showing is that even in today's world, when there is no scale, which is where we want to lead the entire space, basically even today with Ethereum blocks, which are very short, and hence propagating them is not that challenging, we were capable of showing that we bring value even in this challenging case, which for us was important because, when you talk to mining pools, these guys are very pragmatic. You know, we tell them, hey, we want to move the space to the future where it's going to be scale, and they're telling us that is perfectly fine, but what do we get right now? How is it good for me right now? And then we had to not only explain, but also show empirically that for example, blocks can reach can be transmitted much faster than what is currently possible. And we have brought this, the performance very close to the theoretical one, because we are capable of pushing this Ethereum blocks at a scale of 200 to 300 milliseconds. And it's really hard to push this any further, given that we have miners all over the world and stuff like that.
It's really interesting, Aleks, just to interrupt for a second, that you are also, by exploring the capacity of Ethereum, by looking at those short blocks and also looking at the structures of others, that you're essentially making it possible and plausible for more applications to run in terms of their white paper, if you understand what I mean. So you're creating the ability for them to scale and operate as intended. So once again, I would imagine that many of these parties, including Ethereum, are very excited about your technology. And in that context, how would you define yourself? Would you say that you are first and foremost a centralized technology company that's actually trying to, through that plug and play, application, by enabling and enfranchising greater scalability, are you fundamentally a technology company that's offering the code and the technology to startups around the world, or are you just completely open source as a foundation and then plan to build upon that?
We are a technology company that will have all of its code open source, because we operate in this blockchain space. And so when we talk, for example, you mentioned the centralized component of our network, which is definitely the case, but at the same time, we are changing basically the model of how you can scale blockchains. And so basically what we are saying is like, hey, this is a centralized network. However, we have built this network with some guarantees. And the guarantees are, we, BloXroute, or whoever else may be running a BloXroute-like network, should not be capable of censoring transactions and blocks that are the data going through the network. And hence, and if that actually happens, it will be easy to notice this by the peer-to-peer network. And so basically, we are a technology network. We are a very centralized, old-fashioned company. We have to run the business and to basically run this network. But at the same time, working in the blockchain space, it would be impossible for us to go out and to many of the communities and say, oh, don't worry about that. We are just going to speed you up and don't worry about centralization. So the key purpose of BloXroute is to still keep everything decentralized. And the key idea is that nobody, including BloXroute, is capable of controlling the blockchain system, because if we can, then it's no longer a blockchain system.
Exactly. And to put it in a nutshell, you're really that centralized heartbeat for a decentralized body. You're what creates the pulse to enable this entire ecosystem to light up at the scale it needs. And I think that's probably the most important part, is that you're pro-decentralization, but you've built structures to really bring it forward and bring it to the fore. Now, some of the features your team have built are things like no protocol changes, provably neutral design, and you're gradually developing as well. So talk us through those points, especially the point of provability, because obviously that's all built into that heart, that central structure and technology that's going to drive the innovation forward.
True. So basically, the idea behind the provable neutrality is that basically nobody, including the administrators of BloXroute or whoever is running the network, should be capable of stopping blocks from propagating, right? And so basically, it's a hard problem, because while if we have gateways and we have a relay network that is pushing all this data through, how can we actually achieve that, right? And so basically, the key idea is to before any block is routed through BloXroute, it gets encrypted, okay? Such that when it comes to us, it is impossible, because the data is encrypted, we don't see what's happening inside. The data first needs to be distributed to all the parties in a blockchain system, right? Once that happens, then the receivers of the receiving nodes basically query the sending node and ask like, hey, did you by any chance send this particular block? If you did, please send us the key so that we can figure out what is that you have sent, right? And so basically the key idea is that the network itself first has to distribute the data, and only afterwards does it become visible on what has actually been sent. And so basically this is one of the components that is ensuring that the high level idea is that you have all these peer-to-peer nodes, which are still good and necessary. Peer-to-peer communication is still necessary, but not to transmit data, because peer-to-peer, sending a lot of data through a peer-to-peer network is fundamentally inefficient. Right? It takes a lot of hops, paths may not be as good, and so on. But at the same time, this peer-to-peer network is still capable of doing a great job of auditing, like measuring and understanding that things within this centralized network are still operating fine, right? And so having this different setup, which is it is a centralized network, but the network itself is incapable of being malicious. If it is, the endpoint should figure that out. This is the new kind of a service that we are, the new kind of a set of guarantees that we are giving to the blockchain communities. And on top of that, of course, because we are making our work open sourced, then anyone can take it and have a backup network that in case anything goes wrong with the BloXroute network, they can stand up their own network and then just not rely on us. So basically this is another level of guarantees that we provide to the blockchain communities, and they ask us, you know, I mean, when we talk to people, they tell us, okay, we've heard that how this thing works. On top of that, we want to have more guarantees, and so we give this to them so that they can feel safe in deploying us and not really depending on our infrastructure. But all that said, I would like to also add the fact that our infrastructure itself is distributed among many different providers. We are never depending on a single provider, because if that happens, then we would have to move to some other provider. And so currently we are sitting on 3, and we intend to increase the number of providers that we're going to sit to much of it.
I hope so, because 3 is, you know, a relatively small number. But when you're talking about that provably neutral stance, it is so important that we know, you know, as consumers perhaps, or as users of BloXroute in the future, that the agenda is to make sure that fundamentally the objective is decentralization, you know, for the broader network itself, rather than, you know, just the technology that you represent, which has to be at this stage relatively centralized to, you know, to enable, you know, what you're trying to build out.
And basically just one quick other note, not only is it important for the consumers and for the entire rest of the world, it is important for us, because at a point when a blockchain becomes really important and dominant, I mean, there's going to be likely ideas of like, hey, let's censor this part or that part, and we as BloXroute don't want to be in the middle of that battle. And this is precisely why we designed it such that we have these guarantees that we're going to be safe among others. So whoever comes to us and say, hey, do this and that, we're going to tell them, hey, go read our white paper. We can't do that, and we can explain. I mean, we are happy to discuss why that is not possible, but it is built in the very design of our system.
Exactly. So really what you're saying is you try to build in democracy, you know, as much as possible into this, and fairness through this neutrality. I want to talk to you a bit more about the tech itself, though, because once again, harping back to the fundamentals, to achieve the objective of serious scalability, to enable, blockchains to come to life as they need to be. You have argued that there's faster routing processes built in. You also have faster block propagation built in, more efficient solutions, and as you mentioned, you have that key gateway. So if you could just elaborate a bit more on what really sets your technology, your gateway apart to those who are also trying to do similar solutions, being either a hub, a bespoke hub, or being another layer 0 solution. We know of a few projects. What's the key differentiator for BloXroute?
So let me try to distinguish relative to what others are trying to do, at least that I know of. Mm-hmm. So some people say, hey, let's just have some faster network. That's the key, because things are slow on peer-to-peer. If we just provide a faster network, things are going to go up and they're going to scale. And that is fundamentally not true, because even if you have a really great network between all the endpoints, that in itself doesn't give you scale. To really have a scalability, it is necessary to do the hard work in the background, which is what we are doing, which basically means propagating transactions ahead of time, caching those transactions, and doing a lot of work in the background so that you can actually compress the blocks when the time comes for them to be sent. So it's not just better networking, it's really smarter networking on one end. Right. On the other end, there are ideas of building a truly decentralized content distribution network, basically saying, because what we are saying is, hey, you have a central network that is audited, this is how we give you scale, but at the same time provide guarantees that there is no funny business in the middle. Others are saying, no, let's go even further and let's build a completely decentralized CDNs. I have spent some time, 10 plus years, in the area of CDNs. And so basically I like that proposition as an academic, because that's a nice academic problem. However, in terms of really being capable of delivering that idea, I think there are so many challenges, and that is a very, very hard thing. I'll just try to explain why that's the case. The reason why blockchains work that well and their current success thus far really lies in cryptography, right? Because in cryptography, you can actually prove that something has happened, and so you provide a cryptographic proof, and so whoever is looking at that is convinced that what you did is correct, right? Right. If you want to go to the networking and try to do this in terms of networks, and you really try to have a decentralized network where you own one node, I own another, somebody else a third. Now this idea doesn't work so well in the networks, because networks are these complex systems where actually just using cryptography is not going to help, because I can say, listen, my communication wasn't good at this point, and I can do many things to manipulate the system, and hence doing it in this direction, I think, is academically interesting, but realistically very flawed, very unfeasible. And so this is basically where we sit. And if I would have to add another analogy, because I figure out you like those, what we are central systems are bad. I mean, central governments may be very bad because there is not much power to the people, because they are very centralized, and so they decide what to do. On the other hand, these super decentralized systems are nice because there is a lot of freedom to the people, but they often may be inefficient. So our way or our approach would be something as a truly transparent and auditable government, something that is centralized because we have to do a really important job, but at the same time, there are true and open, there is transparency and guarantees that what we are doing, everybody can judge and see.
And can verify as well.
Yeah, it can verify and see that. So I think this is a pretty reasonable and good point in between all these different approaches to really help move towards scalability without moving away from many of the core ideas behind blockchains.
Right. It's essentially like removing the veil or of a blueprint that you've designed for a centralized system for, ironically, a decentralized network. You
Yes.
have architected that blueprint. Now, with regard to, let's talk about Bitcoin for a moment. Just because, you mentioned centralization, we're talking about the prospects of sound money for some, but the way in which Bitcoin's playing out right now is functioning as a hedge digital asset for, and relatively speculative by design right now. So you mentioned Bitcoin Cash. We know that Roger Ver, for example, is a proponent of scaling, to develop his camp and his fork into something that can be utilized as sound money in the future. Now, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin itself, given that they have moved away from, increasing block sizes? They moved away from, tweaking the tech and really just focusing on what it stands for as it evolved, both as a technology and, more importantly, as a sort of social entity that those who wanted it to be, the new gold of the new era. What are your thoughts on that, given that you're so pro-scaling?
Yes. So basically, I tend to, number one, academic on one hand. On the other hand, I am in the blockchain community, but we are in the same way that the BloXroute is neutral. I personally tend to stay away from all this buzz about, hey, these guys did that, those others did something else. In general, everyone is free to do whatever they believe in. I do believe that to have blockchains to really be useful to the world, they need to scale. And I think that on-chain scaling is a really necessary, because anything that is outsourcing and doing something else, well, it's something else, right? If we have a layer 2 solution, which again, I'm not against, I wish everybody all the luck, but nothing is easy to be done in the real world. And every new solution necessarily brings its own baggage and its own set of problems. Right?
Well said, Aleks. And in that context, what I did want to get to is, even with respect to Bitcoin emerging as potentially, a new digital asset likened to, I guess, the analogy we see in the history of gold. I don't like to even reference gold, to be honest. But let's just say, it emerges as a hedging digital asset. A store of value, as some people would, perhaps call it. Now, it still would require scaling, even for it to represent something like gold in a global sense. It requires immense scaling from where it is now. And my question is, is there some sort of reticence, from your observation from that community, from Blockstream, or to, really enable something like Bitcoin to scale, when we see the likes of Roger Ver, such an advocate for scaling for his agenda, for his fork, and for his version of sound money, which of the future, which is Bitcoin Cash. I'm just trying to understand, if there's any reticence from your sense about what Bitcoin's actually trying to do, despite that they want to move in perhaps in a different direction and maintain this idea of a hedge asset for the future.
BloXroute, basically, we had a lot of really great collaboration with the Bitcoin Cash community, because philosophically we are on the same page, because they want to scale on-chain, which is what we are doing. And so we had a lot of help from the Bitcoin Unlimited community, from Bitcoin ABC. We are really working fine with them. All that said, I'm not, Bitcoin is what it is, and people around that are doing whatever they are free to do. The reason why I came into this space and why I'm sitting with BloXroute now and doing the work here is that I believe that there is much more to cryptocurrencies and blockchains, and this ability to efficiently move money around than just making it like as another asset or something that is valuable. You understand? And
I totally understand. You're talking about real use case.
Yes. And so basically, I think that the future lies there, and it's still undetermined who's going to win there. And if you're doing nothing to make sure that your system is capable of grabbing those opportunities in the future, then you're not going to compete for that. And so this is what I attended some of the Bitcoin conferences because we are working with many of the miners. Many of the miners who sit in the Bitcoin Cash community also, of course, mine Bitcoin because it has a very high value.
Right.
My message to them was like, hey, I think you guys are not really getting all the big ideas behind this a new digital money revolution, and things may look fine right now, and good luck with all of that. It may be actually true that Bitcoin will become a new gold in the future, and it's going to be super valuable. Good luck with that, and I really say that really honestly. But the reason I'm here is that I sense that there is much bigger opportunities lie, and so I think, and many are pushing for those because I've been talking to all these different projects, and so that's what drives me to say, hey, we really want to enable all these things to happen, because once we do, then there's going to be a lot of value in that, and there's going to be a lot of good for the rest of the world.
Exactly. And Aleks, I'm with you. I'm with you, obviously, because I wouldn't spend my time speaking with so many different startups trying to help, people understand beyond the first iteration we saw, perhaps, that brought blockchain to life, and that was Bitcoin. But I guess I was just getting to the point in the question of why wouldn't Bitcoin want to really accelerate in terms of scalability, capacity, beyond just lightning experimentation, which is very much at the experimentation level. And as you mentioned, with other suggestions of bolted on solutions, they may not be, the best way forward. Maybe it's better to look at those underlying technologies, which is exactly what BloXroute is. I'm struggling to understand why something like Bitcoin wouldn't, plug in, why they wouldn't want to scale for their own ends, and again, the question must be asked to Blockstream, I suppose, and I don't know the answers to that, but it is interesting to see those who do plug in, because at the end of the day, there has to be a use case and there has to be applications for them wanting to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see what evolves and which applications come forth on these networks. Now, what's it looking like in terms of the pipeline of blockchains onboarding onto BloXroute in the years to come, or even next year, for example? What can you tell us of what's expected in terms of the expansion of this? I guess the use of BloXroute in context.
Yes. So basically, we are releasing our version 1 this week or next week. There's going to be an announcement, obviously. And so this means that whoever has either a Bitcoin Cash gateway or an Ethereum gateway, they can just, whoever has an Ethereum node or a Bitcoin Cash node, they can download our gateway and utilize that. But on top of that, we are working with many other blockchains. In particular, for example, we are working with JP Morgan Quorum. It's not a public blockchain, but still there's somebody who, they're a fork of Ethereum, hence it was easy for us to work with them. Right. We're working with a lot of projects from China. There is a lot of enthusiasm there. So there we're working with Ontology, with Conflux, and we of course have, I didn't mention all the blockchains that we're working with, but it's a really interesting landscape because of course many of these blockchains already started doing something in terms of trying to scale. Some of them trying to do sharding, some of them trying to do some different consensus mechanism. But I'm happy to tell you that I still didn't see a single blockchain that wouldn't benefit oftentimes very significantly from BloXroute. Right. And as soon as we start talking to their technical people and really try diving down into how it all works and what we bring, it becomes a really easy decision on both parts, to figure out that this is the case. On our end, I have to tell you this as well, because there is a lot of interest coming to us. Well, we are also looking at all these projects and trying to understand which of them are going to be successful. And so we have our own interviewing page where we ask them, like, so what are your applications? What is that you are good for? Why do you need scale?
Yes.
When will you bring in all these different applications? And so it's a mutual kind of a two-way.
It's a vetting process, isn't it, Alex?
It's a vetting process.
And quite honestly, there's a lot of crypto crap out there. So I'm really glad that you are very strict with regard to the criteria that it would be required to meet to pass the grade, to make the grade.
True. I completely agree with that. And so basically this is, and so of course, I mean, we are talking to many different projects, some really high-end projects currently. I can't name names because it's still ongoing. I don't want to ruin any of these discussions, but basically any big name that you've heard of, we are either already are working to scale them or are talking to scale them.
So is that also in the sense of mainstream brands and names, or are we talking just within the crypto space?
There is a lot of interest from the enterprises. Mm-hmm. And obviously it's hard for me to name names because
NDAs.
NDAs, and so, but there definitely is a lot of interest from the big tech communities, companies, and I think there are different incentives there. A very important one is that many of these companies are having trouble with privacy leaks and all these different issues with security and privacy, and this is something. Blockchains are providing a lot of transparency in that space. So basically, I wouldn't be surprised if one of these, a larger number of these big companies start utilizing blockchains as a way to kind of improve their PR and standing, and to show that they really care about transparency and similar.
I would tend to agree. Now, with regard to consensus, obviously, you have your unique design, the technology, but also mining. I did want to discuss this at length because one of the things that came up in the readings was that you're an advocate for, as a team, you're an advocate for lowering fees, making things much more accessible. Can you talk to us a bit more about, the premise, the intention and what you're trying to facilitate here?
The key, I mean, we keep talking about scalability and we say, hey, it's more efficient, things are moving faster. These are all fine things. But at the end of the day, people really care about cost.
Exactly.
And when I say people, I mean these applications, exchanges, whoever, you and me, when I'm sending money, I don't want to pay some crazy amount of money.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to ask you about this, because of Bitcoin, for example, despite the ideal agenda and the idealism built around it, which is quite beautiful, especially if you read the white paper, it's expensive, for transactions, and it's time consuming in comparison to many now. So, take it away. How do you reduce these fees?
Yeah. So basically, scalability means lower fees. I mean, and I'll give you an empirical example. With Bitcoin, which has a truly low scalability, you can have spikes when many people want to send transactions through, but they are not going to go. When people don't want to wait, they're going to pay more and more, and hence this is why the fees are increased.
Right.
On the other hand, I'll give an example of, for example, Bitcoin Cash, which doesn't have that much of a traffic. Well, the fees there are at the order of one Satoshi per byte, right? And so this is telling you that when there is a lot of throughput there in the system, well, this is when the fees go down, right? And when there is a lack of capacity, this is when the fees significantly increase. And one might think like, wow, well, for the miners, it's good to just sit on a congested system and pick up these big fees. But on the long run, that is not a good idea, right? Because then people are not going to use that system because it's too expensive.
Exactly.
And hence, there's going to be less and less congestion and nobody's using it, hence it's not good for nobody. In our analysis, it's not hard to show that when you have scaling, you can have a win-win-win solution for all the parties. That means that the costs for end users can significantly get reduced. The fees collected by miners can still increase because the scale goes at a much higher pace than how much the fees reduce. And so it's good for everybody. And basically, this is, I mean, it's not just, I'm a computer scientist, but we did talk to economists, we did talk to people from, at Northwestern, we have a pretty good school of economy and
game theorists,
management, and it's obvious. I mean, to these people at least, they convinced us that there is a very strong economic model that makes all of this sustainable, which is why we're doing.
It's so interesting because basically what you're saying is that there's a synergy between lower fees and high scalability, high throughputs, which makes sense. Now, the big question will be, will there be still a cohort of people globally who are willing to pay high transaction fees if they see something as just solely and holiest or a value or a hedge asset? I think that's possible and plausible because, once again, they're looking at price points. But when it comes to use cases, when it comes to applications, the absolute imperative is going to be low fees. Absolutely. So, you're leading the way, arguably, to reduce the friction when it comes to the consumer.
I mean, these applications are really why I'm in this space. And this is something that people can actually understand. When I talk to my wife, she's not in this space at all. I try to explain how micropayments are good on the web, how it can actually help in all different areas. And this is something that really gets me excited about this. So again, if necessary, there's always going to be people wanting to make another gold, and good luck with that.
But you're focused on really expanding.
We really are focused on scaling because that's where the future, and not just I think that's where the opportunities are to move and to help the society and to make a lot of money.
I totally agree with you.
Business cases there.
In every way, I agree with you. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room with regard to governments and even perhaps the enterprise sort of connection or the partnerships that are often there globally, as we've seen economies play out worldwide. Now, if scaling is the secret sauce for real value in the future, and indeed, the proof is there that it is, surely the governments are also looking at things like BloXroute. They must be, because if they're interested in their own digital assets and especially developing their own blockchain-based economies, they're wanting technology that makes it possible, and scalability is the only way, given the kind of trillion-dollar economy that exists for, not just money itself, but also businesses that are built on, money. Are governments starting to pay attention to BloXroute? That's the question I'm getting at.
So basically, we are. I mean, if SEC is part of a government, then definitely we are talking to SEC because we have our own security token, and we knew from the very beginning that our token is going to be a security.
Right.
And hence, this is the level at which we are involved with governments. On the other hand, I agree with you that once something becomes really important, this is when governments start to look at that. And the best example is the Libra case.
Right.
Because once Facebook said, like, hey, we want to build a cryptocurrency, this is when everybody started looking at them, the regulators and everybody else, and started to look and say, hey, no, you're not going to do it. We have the monopoly to make money and all these other things. At a high level, I think that it's going to be necessary for blockchains to somehow, I can see that they're going to be used in the future, and it's going to be hard for governments to control that.
Absolutely. It's so exciting that you think that, because they need to jump in, or...
I think the best thing to do is to jump in, which is to an extent what the Chinese government is doing, because they are kind of feeling and understanding that there is a lot of applications there and interest for them to sit on that bandwagon. But my thinking is that eventually there's going to be a merging point at which things are going to go further without much friction. I hope.
I also hope that, and I think we'll see less of this dichotomy between the people and, you know, emerging startups that are perhaps pro-enterprise. I think there'll be a melding in some respects. But let's talk about the security token. I was fascinated that you decided to do that from the outset. Clearly, you understood the jurisdictional pressures, especially from the US, in the, you know, the mechanics of your token. So can you tell us firstly why you decided to do the security token and what it means for the future when it comes to investment?
Yes. So basically, let me just explain. So going back, the important question still unanswered is, so how do we make money? But basically, I told you, the end users have their fees significantly lowered because of the scalability. The miners get a lot of much more money than they're currently, because despite the fact that the fees are smaller, there's many more fees, and so they can earn much more money. And BloXroute is taking 10% of the miner on top of the miner fee from the end users. We are never charging miners. They get a free lunch because they're important part of this two-sided system, right? Okay. And so basically, if you think, if we leave 99.9% of the value that we create to the existing ecosystem, the end users get 90% of the value, the miners get another 9.9%, and we get 0.1%. And you may think like, hey, Alex, you are a crazy guy, because why would you want to leave that much value on the table? But the point is that a very tiny fraction at a really large scale, in a really large scale systems, creates a lot of revenue. Okay, and so basically we try to come up with a way to let people invest and get part of this revenue by holding our BLXR token. Okay, so our BLXR token is a security token. There's ever going to be 10 million of these tokens, and basically the way it has been designed, it's a security equity. I will explain that piece later. What that means is that if you own 10% of the BLXR tokens and we make 10 Bitcoins a day, well, you just earned 1 Bitcoin because that's 10% of these 10 Bitcoins, right? And so basically, the idea is to feed all these fees that we collect to the holders of our token, right?
Of your security token, right?
Of the security token.
And that's where the accruing value comes in. This is really important because it's not a utility token, and you're actually investing in supporting the security token from the revenue that you make. And that revenue comes from that fee. So it's quite a unique model. It's a way of also providing consistent dividends, essentially, to those holders, and legitimate.
And the dividends go on the revenue. It doesn't, because if you just hold equity, you get your revenues of the profits, right? Here we are immediately streaming all the revenues to the holders, and of course the company will never sell at least 20% of the of the security tokens, so we can actually fund our operations independently, and so this is important. And just one other important thing, and in case it happens that somebody ever buys BloXroute, so that it's
great point.
So these security tokens become part of equity, and so you get a piece of that as well. And so whoever is the new owner may continue giving you all the fees or not, but we were very careful of making a really good deal, because we really want this to be available to people so that they can actually feel BloXroute as something worth investing in and
absolutely. And Alex, I love that we can say investment and mean it, because I can't say that with utility tokens. It's impossible. It's only a pre-utility support investment, in the sense of the prospects of it becoming a utility, which is very different to a security. So surely with respect to the potential of more securities coming, you're leading the way in a token modeling design that arguably is sustainable. So I wonder if other people are watching you, other startups, that are building now and thinking, should I make the switch? Should I make a security token that actually can be sustainable and can allow for people to put their money in, knowing that it is something that could potentially accrue in value and have that expectation of growth?
Yes. So basically, I think that I agree with your description of utility tokens, where the idea is like, hey, this is going to be used in future, so that then maybe you can, I don't know, buy more storage or something like that. But the key idea is that once you invest in such a token, then the value should go up over time, and hence people can make money. Right. We are a very kind of a traditional company in terms of, hey, we have clients, we have users who are basically, we are earning money. And so basically we just wanted to make it in this digitalized and cryptocurrency era, we wanted to make a mechanism that would make it possible to simply funnel this in real time almost to the holders of this particular token.
It's fascinating.
I really think that such a model might be applicable and can actually apply to future startups as a general model, where you sell your revenues, you raise money in that way, so that you can. I think that's a pretty neat model.
It also creates a lot more trust for those parties that want to list you. Especially in mainstream sectors, with regard to exchanges, we haven't seen a lot of that sort of entry into those marketplaces outside of crypto exchanges. Now, do you think that that's also positioning you well for a greater global reach? Being a security token, can you talk us through the roadmap there? Because I'm not aware exactly of when the time periods are for access for the public, for parties to start to interact with it.
Yes. So basically, we are. It's going to be announced, and you may have noticed that I'm not eager to give any.
I do. I understand. That's the stutter.
Concrete dates for a good reason, because then you commit to something, but either by the end of this year or very early next year, there's going to be an announcement on our security token offering. It is going to be, unfortunately, this time around, it's going to be a Reg D. Not unfortunately, but that's what it is. Reg D means accredited investors from anywhere in the world who can pass online accreditation tests, or whatever, however you call that, for the US securities. They are going to be able to invest in this particular round. The minimum amount is going to be $10,000, and there's going to be some amount of offering. That said, we are working hard to also get Reg A plus from the SEC, meaning that for those who won't qualify or won't be able to participate in this round coming late this year or early next year, then they would be able to participate. And this is not going to be limited just to accredited investors, but it's going to be. The idea is to, of course, the idea behind A plus regulation is to be open to anybody to invest.
I see. And that's going to be a really good sign for the future also, if you can move from Reg D to Reg A to A plus.
We are working on that, and
we're
spending a lot of money on our lawyers. It's a very expensive process, and I ended up knowing about all these legal
jargon
things much more than I ever wanted, but that's the nature of
it. But honestly, Aleks, I do appreciate that you're explaining this to us, because we do want to see more of the A plus play out. Because yes, it's fine if you're the accredited investor with 10K plus to invest, but there are a lot of people who aren't in that scenario who perhaps want to take part in your ecosystem and also obviously reap the benefits. So it's great to hear that you are considering, the need for more inclusion. And I do really appreciate that. Now, with regard to again, you can't commit to specific timeframes, but what can you give us a bit more insight into in terms of your expectations of what the token will do, given you know exactly how the architecture is of and the token modeling is with the fee structure. What can you anticipate, or what are some of the estimates that the team have made for the growth of the token?
So basically, the token itself is a gateway to the revenues of BloXroute. Okay, and so if at least one of the blockchains that we support ends up going into the thousands of transactions per second rates, which we can enable them, this already creates a stream of revenues that can easily go to $1 billion a year, right? Okay. And having more blockchains being successful, which is what I'm cheering for everybody, creates, of course, much more revenues. Of course, those who are gonna participate in the investors get all these analysis in detail, and maybe you can find some of those on our website and stuff like that. But basically, from day one, the holders of the token get the revenue in their pocket immediately. Okay, so, and they're free to do whatever they like. If you end up with a currency that you don't believe in or you want to sell, you can immediately do that. So really, it's streamlining the revenues created by BloXroute to the holders of this particular security token. And so I really think it's a great deal. I'm not saying this because...
It's not financial advice, but just, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm hearing what you're saying.
I'm just saying it's really designed to be a really fair way of sharing the potential success of BloXroute Labs.
Yes, and we certainly need to see more of that giving back. That's what I do like about the model. It's the complete opposite to the way in which we've seen historical securities operate, where, look at banks, for example, most of the revenue goes to the very top and very little of it trickles down, and you're really flipping that on its head. And we see other financial startups like, for example, Celsius Network. They're just trying to change scenarios so there's more giving back to the people, whether that be through utilities, whether that be through now the more trusted securities. It's going to be really interesting to see this play out in the future. Now, with regard to investors, you had some really big names come forth. Let's talk about them. So Metastable, Fembushi, Coinbase Ventures, my apologies, and Pantera. These are some really big names in that mix. How did that play out? Given that you're a security token, but you needed capital to build BloXroute, how does it work for them in terms of the token?
Well, I mean, basically, what they invested in is they actually bought the exactly same security token
but earlier on,
form of soft, right?
Right.
And so basically, for them, of course, once the token sale is announced, which is the security token offering sale is announced, then there is a 1-year lockup period, which is by design there. I mean, that's the law, that we can't change that.
Sure.
Then on top of that, there's likely going to be a 1-month lockup period for the second year. The reason we did that because of the experiences of some other projects, fairly good technological projects that had a pretty bad
experience. I totally agree. I saw so many were demolished by the extraordinary actions of venture capitalists. And let's be real. Let's be real for a second. The capital, the VCs want to make money. That's fine. But we don't want to see startups crushed by their greed. And so the lockups are so important for everyone. So we know that there is that barrier, that complete block to a dumping of that token.
Correct. And on top of all of that, there is a temptation for the holders of our token to ever sell it, because, I mean, hey, that's a gateway to a potentially stream of revenue, to the stream of revenue, not potentially, but to the stream of revenue from BloXroute. And hence, people are going to think twice before they sell something else. And so this is another kind of a mechanism that we built in an attempt to really create a sustainable a system that can work for
I totally agree. I think that those investors were fortunate because they invested in security. One of the very first, in fact, of this entire ecosystem. I would speculate that many of them won't actually sell because, you know, they've invested in a security token, which is possibly changing the paradigm, changing the discussion, and maybe leads into more uptake of that model in the future for other startups. Now, one of the things that was interesting is that you have partnered with Ontology. Obviously, I know that team very well. You mentioned before you do a lot of due diligence and a lot of vetting. What's the nature of that partnership, and what's the idea behind it as you look to China?
So basically, I've been in China. I'm going again in December. So I've spent 1 month in the last 4 months in China, talking to people. There is a lot of enthusiasm there and a lot of good projects.
Right.
But Ontology ended up being somebody really, you can easily figure out when a project is serious. And as I told you, what we are looking for is like, hey, what's your game plan? How do you really plan to utilize the scalability that we want to bring to your system?
Right.
And so this is this is a challenging question because not always do they think in those terms. But this is when, at least I realized that they have a respectable team, that they are appear to be doing the right things, that they are going to the mainstream companies and talking to them and telling them why moving to their system is going to be useful. And so we clicked it was an easy call on our end. And so we are working on a daily basis. We are basically communicating with them because I'm also involved on the technical side, and they really are very responsive. And again, it's a joint work between the two parties.
So it's a genuine reciprocal partnership.
Yes.
Right.
It can't be just us working and they can't do it. So we are really working together, but that is really going great. So we feel really good about it.
And it's really interesting you say that, because having known Ontology for some time, and obviously Neo, which really gave way to the emergence of Ontology, one of the key criticisms has always been the scalability challenges of their technology. So it's the reason why I found that partnership very interesting, because there's no question that Li Jun, the founder of Ontology, is in every way tech-centric. Likewise, his team. He is absolutely focused on building business as well, which is his background. Now, you come in with technology to essentially enable a lot of that scalability that they lacked. So it's going to be really interesting to see your position in China. If you can do it with Ontology, you're going to be doing that with a lot of other Chinese startups, I would argue as well, significant blockchains, because there's so much going on in China right now. The potential there, I would imagine, would be immense for BloXroute.
It definitely is. As I told you, I've been there. I've seen this from the first hand, and we really have a really good team in China, which is connecting us to all these different projects. We already partnered with Conflux, which is another very promising.
Yes, I know that team well.
I had a really good meetup with nervous people. They're a really amazing kind of community, and you feel. I felt, because I'm attending all these different meetups.
Yep.
There, I really felt like they asked me questions for easily 2 hours. My talk was 1 hour, and then another 2 hours they were asking questions all over, which is really good, and you sense really the strength.
I totally agree. There are some really great projects that are often overlooked because, of their high tech value, in a scenario right now where crypto gambling really is the predominant sort of the action we see. But I think as time goes on, we're going to see much more securities come forward. We're going to also see a lot more high tech come to play in this arena, and you're part of that conversation because you're making it possible through scaling. So honestly, Aleksandar, thank you so much for your time today to allow us an insight into a bit more of BloXroute. I do apologize we didn't go more into the tech. Is there anything you'd like to say to those, in case we missed anything that was really important for this first conversation between us?
No, I think it was quite a comprehensive discussion. My message to all the people out there, all the blockchain systems, or the industry, whoever, just like regular people out there, basically, our message is that scalability, of course, is an important thing for blockchains. And my message is that no blockchain should ever fail because they can't scale. That shouldn't be an excuse for a blockchain to fail. That said, there's so much more to be done on usability, on pushing this to the mainstream, and there's so many other projects. But again, scalability is something that we'll worry about. Don't worry about, consider it solved, or something that we can work with a particular project to push them over the line. And so let's focus on the future, because what really matters is if in 50 years, what is going to happen 50 years from now with this technology? Is it going to be everywhere or not? So this is really the threshold that we still didn't pass, and we really are working day and night to make it happen.
Well, I thank you sincerely, mate. I really mean that, because to me, I totally concur. Scalability is the lifeblood of this entire ecosystem. It is what literally supports it. Perhaps another analogy is the nervous system. Really, scalability has to uphold, all of the weight that's coming, and it's exciting to see more and more weight is being added to the blockchain space, and it needs the support like your technology. So I wish you, Yuri, and all your team the very best as you continue to build out the tech to enable more interaction, more collaboration, more interconnections, because at the end of the day, we definitely want to see a flourishing ecosystem that has real applications at the endpoint and seamless use right across the globe. And you're part of that by being the chief architect and co-founder of BloXroute. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Brad. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome, mate.